Imagine a creature so mighty it could melt steel with a single breath, yet it refuses to eat for 17 long days, lying in silence as if waiting for the end. Until one quiet child steps through the cage, unseen, and changes everything in a way no science could ever explain. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and tell us in the comments where are you watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. The Aurora Menagerie floated quietly at the edge of the Draconis Belt, a giant sanctuary orbiting a dim red star. Once, its bright corridors had been filled with visitors from dozens of worlds. They came to see creatures that could dance in zero gravity or sing in harmonics that bent light itself. But now, the halls were nearly silent. Dust gathered in corners where crowds had once stood. Empty cages whispered of a past that seemed too far away to return. Marlowe walked slowly through the dim corridors, her tablet glowing faintly in her hands. She was a xenobiologist, gray streaks in her hair and lines across her face that spoke of years spent studying life across galaxies. She had seen rare animals heal from terrible injuries. She had seen entire species return from the edge of extinction. But this case was different. In the largest enclosure of the sanctuary, the dragon lay still. Its official name was Specimen Orion 77, but everyone simply called it the dragon. It stretched nearly 20 feet from nose to tail, scales shining in shades of deep indigo and violet. Scars crisscrossed its body, marks left by brutal years in illegal fighting pits. Its wings, folded tightly, looked heavy with memory. The dragon had not eaten in 17 days. For a creature of its kind, survival without food was possible for months. Yet the refusal was troubling. Day after day, trays of imported livestock, rare minerals, and nutrient gels were left untouched. The caretakers counted each refusal, recording every wasted attempt. The food remained where it was placed, ignored as though invisible. Captain Gideon Halberg, once the proud owner of the menagerie when it still entertained crowds, now stood as a volunteer caretaker. His strong shoulders had carried fire-breathing acts and juggling stunts once admired across the stars. Now his hands simply rested on the railing as he watched the dragon with quiet sorrow. "It's not sickness," Gideon said softly, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much. "It's something else. Maybe he has given up." Dr. Marlowe checked her tablet again. The readings told a frustrating story. Heart rate steady, body temperature normal, neural activity calm. Everything was in perfect range. Nothing explained the hunger strike. The machine said the dragon was healthy. But when she looked into its golden eyes, she saw only emptiness, like a flame burned out long ago. The sanctuary itself felt hollow. The grand stage where alien dancers once dazzled had gone dark. Holographic platforms that once lifted acrobats through dazzling flips now hung lifeless. Echoes filled the air where applause used to roar. The Aurora Menagerie, once called a wonder of the spiral arm, was now a shadow of its former self. For the dragon, it was worse than silence. It was history that could not be erased, captured as a hatchling, traded through black markets. Forced to fight with neural disruptors that burned into its skin, it had lived a life of pain. Dr. Marlowe had studied the report. The cruelty was recorded in cold words, but the scars told the story more clearly. This was a creature broken not by nature, but by design. Each morning, Dr. Marlowe stood before the enclosure. She whispered observations into her recorder. though the words were always the same. No change. No response. Refusal continues. Her assistant had resigned days earlier, unable to bear the hopelessness of the routine. Still, she remained. Inside the enclosure, the dragon stared at the wall. It never turned its head to the food, never shifted its gaze to the caretakers who passed by. The shimmering field around its space glowed faintly blue, humming with energy strong enough to contain its fire. But no flames had come, no roar shook the metal walls, only silence. For viewers, this moment was haunting. A creature of legend, capable of melting steel with a breath, reduced to lying in stillness, waiting for something unnamed. Dr. Marlowe rubbed her tired eyes. "There must be something missing," she whispered. "A reason beyond the charts." She remembered stories from ancient texts, fragments that spoke of dragons as beings of both fire and soul. Perhaps the instruments could measure heat, but not the unseen spark of will. Gideon leaned against the railing, his silver hair catching the dim light. "He's tired," he said, his voice almost breaking. "Sometimes the strongest creatures are the ones who stop fighting." The weight of his words lingered. Neither science nor experience could argue with the truth they both felt. The Aurora menagerie remained quiet. Lights flickered in the halls. Distant machines hummed to keep the sanctuary alive. Yet at the heart of it, a dragon lay still, untouched meals piling by its side, eyes empty, as though searching for something lost. And so the stage was set. A creature of fire, refusing to burn. A sanctuary filled with silence, and a mystery that no one knew how to solve. The Aurora menagerie had grown used to quiet days. But on the morning of the 18th day of the dragon's hunger, a school vessel docked at the sanctuary. The docking clamps groaned as the ship latched on, its engines fading into silence. The arrival was part of an educational program meant to teach children about the care of rescued animals from across the galaxy. The children came from Terra Nova Colony, a young settlement with wide skies and restless hearts. For most of them, this trip was a chance to see rare creatures they had only read about in books or seen in holographic lessons. Their voices filled the corridor, echoing against the metal walls as they disembarked, teachers hurrying to keep them in line. Among them walked Lyra Calden. She was 8 years old, small and quiet, with brown hair that fell loosely around her face. Unlike the other children, she did not point at the glowing walls or laugh at the strange gravity shifts of the station. Her gray eyes moved carefully, as if she were listening to something no one else could hear. While others chattered with excitement, Lyra's silence stood out. The guide assigned to their group was a young man named Talon, a volunteer with pale green skin that marked his Martian heritage. His bright orange uniform looked too big for him, and he carried the polished script of someone who had repeated the same words many times. "Welcome to the Aurora Menagerie," Talon announced, his voice practiced and cheerful. "This sanctuary is home to creatures rescued from dangerous conditions across the galaxy. Here, they receive medical care, rest, and eventually transfer to safe homes." The children leaned against the clear observation panels, staring at glowing cloud serpents as they floated gracefully in tanks of mist. They gasped at the tiny star beasts, creatures that shimmered like sparks in the air. They laughed at the gravity monkeys, once forced to perform dangerous stunts, now tumbling freely in weightless chambers. But Lyra did not laugh. Her gaze wandered beyond the open exhibits. She seemed restless, as though searching for something hidden. After a while, the group approached a corridor marked with a warning sign. The bold letters read, "Restricted access. Authorized personnel only." Talon slowed his steps, turning the children away from the glowing barrier. "This section is not part of today's tour," Talon explained. "Inside is a very special case, a dragon in recovery. But the situation is delicate, and it is not receiving visitors." At the mention of a dragon, the children erupted with questions. One boy, eager and careless, shouted, "Can't we just see it? Dragons are only in stories?" Talon smiled nervously. "Not just stories, but this one is complicated." Then, for the first time since leaving Terra Nova Colony, Lyra spoke. Her voice was soft, almost too quiet to hear. "Is it sick?" Talon blinked, caught off guard by her sudden question. "Not exactly sick," he said carefully, "but it has not been eating. It's very sad." The children giggled. "Dragons don't get sad," one boy argued. "They're just big lizards that breathe fire." Lyra's gray eyes sharpened. "Everything can be sad," she said. Her words were simple, but the weight in her tone silenced the group. The tour continued, but Lyra's attention stayed fixed on the restricted corridor. Her steps slowed whenever the group turned away. Her eyes lingered as though she could feel something on the other side of the glowing barrier. Later, when the class gathered in the repurposed amphitheater to hear a lecture on rehabilitation practices, Lyra hung back. The teachers were distracted, settling restless students and answering endless questions. Talon moved to prepare his presentation. No one noticed when Lyra drifted toward the corridor again. The barrier hummed softly, a wall of light designed to repel anyone without proper clearance. The guard post nearby was empty. The officer had stepped away to deal with a minor emergency involving a crate of escaped lunar birds. Lyra stood in front of the glowing field. She tilted her head, calm and focused. Then, without hesitation, she stepped forward. The barrier shimmered but did not stop her. For reasons no one would understand until much later, the system read her as part of the maintenance crew. The corridor was quiet. The air smelled faintly of metal and sterilized sand. Lyra walked with steady steps, as if she knew where she was going. Her small shoes made no sound on the polished floor. At the end of the corridor stood a massive reinforced chamber. Its window stretched high and wide, giving a view into the dragon's enclosure. There, lying motionless on the sandy ground, was Orion 77. The dragon's scales shifted faintly in the dim light, shades of blue and violet blending like dusk. Its wings lay folded, its eyes closed. It looked like a statue carved from stone, except for the slow rise and fall of its chest. Lyra stood at the window for a long moment, her face calm, her body still. She seemed to be measuring the silence, waiting for something unseen. Then she walked to the access door. With a soft click, the lock cycled open. Beyond the door shimmered the containment field, a wall of light and energy meant to keep the dragon inside. But the field was not designed to stop a child from stepping through. Lyra crossed the threshold, entering the dragon's cage without fear, without hesitation. Alarms should have gone off the moment Lyra stepped into the dragon's chamber, but the system stayed silent. It was Dr. Marlowe who first noticed the impossible on a security monitor. Her tablet slipped from her hands, clattering on the floor. "There's a child in the dragon enclosure," she breathed, her voice sharp with disbelief. Captain Gideon Halberg was already moving. His boots pounded against the metal floor as he ran toward the viewing deck. His mind filled with images too terrible to name. A dragon could incinerate a human in seconds, and this one had not eaten in 17 days. Through the wide observation window, they saw her. Lyra Calden, small and calm, stood only a few steps inside the shimmering containment field. The dragon's golden eye was open now, watching her. "Sound the alarm," shouted Lieutenant Oren, the head of station security, as he arrived with a squad of guards. But Gideon held up a hand. "No sudden movements. If we panic, she's lost. Lyra did not panic. She did not cry. Instead, she walked slowly across the sand, stopping when she was a safe distance from the dragon's head. Then she knelt down. Her lips moved, speaking words too soft for the microphones to capture. Dr. Marlowe leaned closer to the glass. "She's talking to it," she whispered. "But what is she saying?" The dragon's great chest lifted and fell. Its breathing, once shallow and irregular, began to change. Slower, deeper, steady. Its eyes stayed locked on the girl, unblinking. The crew held their breath. Weapons were drawn, but no one dared raise them. Every heartbeat in the control room seemed louder than the faint hum of the containment field. Lyra's voice remained steady, a rhythm like waves against the shore. Though no one could hear her words, the pattern carried a kind of peace. It was not a command. It was not a plea. It was simply presence. The dragon tilted its head slightly, its long neck shifting with surprising grace. Its gaze followed the child, studying her with a focus it had not given to food, caretakers, or even light. Then, with a slow blink, the dragon closed its eye and opened it again. Dr. Marlowe gasped. "That's a signal," she said. "Acknowledgement without aggression. He's responding." The control room erupted in whispers, but Gideon's voice cut through them all. "Watch. Don't interfere." Lyra reached toward the tray of untouched meat placed near the feeding station. Her small hands lifted a piece of beef, edges already drying. She carried it carefully back and placed it on the ground, just within reach of the dragon's claws. Then she sat cross-legged in the sand, her palms open on her knees. Time stretched thin. The dragon looked at the meat, then at the child, then back at the meat. The silence was heavy, pressing on everyone watching. "Come on," Gideon whispered, his voice trembling. "Just try." The dragon moved, one great claw extended, hooking the meat and pulling it. Its jaws opened, teeth glinting in the dim light, and for the first time in 17 days, the dragon took a bite. A collective gasp filled the control room. Dr. Marlowe's hands shook as she pulled up a portable recorder. Neural activity shifting, hormone levels spiking. This is unprecedented. The dragon chewed slowly, as though testing not only the food, but the meaning of the act itself. When the piece was gone, it looked back at the girl. Lyra did not smile. She did not flinch. She simply waited. Her calmness seemed endless, as if she had always known this moment would come. She stood, walked back to the tray, and returned with another piece. Once again, she placed it near the dragon. Once again, she sat back down. The dragon ate again, then again. Piece by piece, the ritual repeated. The girl offering, the dragon accepting. 20 minutes passed this way. The chamber filled with a quiet rhythm, a pattern of trust forming between them. The crew behind the glass could barely speak. Lieutenant Oren shifted uneasily, his finger hovering over the emergency controls. "We should pull her out," he muttered. "This is still dangerous." "No," said Dr. Marlowe firmly. "Look at him. For the first time since he arrived, he is choosing life." The dragon's great head lowered, pressing gently against the sand. Its golden eyes half closed, not in defense, but in rest. A dragon never closed its eyes near a threat. To do so was the highest act of trust. Gideon stared, barely able to breathe. He's not just eating, he's surrendering the weight he carried. Lyra remained seated, her voice still moving in that quiet rhythm. The microphones caught only faint traces, but the effect was clear. The dragon's breathing matched her cadence, a shared rhythm of calm. To the watchers, it felt as if something unseen connected them, an unspoken bridge between a wounded creature and a silent child. The dragon shifted slightly, its wings easing from their tight hold. Scars along its scales caught the dim light, reminders of pain. Yet in that moment, it looked less like a prisoner and more like a being remembering what it meant to be alive. No one in the control room dared move. Even the hum of the machines seemed softer, as though the station itself was holding its breath. Lyra lifted her hand once more, palm open, fingers relaxed. She did not reach for the dragon. She only offered her presence. The dragon blinked again, slow and deliberate. The golden eye closed fully, then opened with calm. For 17 days, the creature had refused every attempt, every gift. Now, with one child's presence, it had accepted food, peace, and trust. Dr. Marlowe's voice trembled. "We are watching a miracle." And so the unspoken connection deepened, a bond beyond science, beyond fear, beyond the broken past of a dragon who had once lost the will to live. The chamber was silent, except for the steady rhythm of the dragon's breathing. The crew behind the glass hardly dared to move. For 17 long days, Orion 77 had refused life itself. Now, with a quiet child seated calmly in the sand, the impossible was unfolding before their eyes. Lyra Calden remained cross-legged, her gray eyes fixed gently on the dragon. She had not flinched when it ate the first piece of meat, nor when its golden eye studied her with fierce intensity. She kept speaking in that quiet, steady rhythm, words carried away by the hum of the containment field, yet powerful enough to hold the attention of a creature built for fire and war. The dragon shifted slightly, pulling its massive body into a more comfortable position. Its wings loosened from their rigid hold, scars stretching across violet scales. Its tail curled inward, no longer tight with defense, but relaxed in cautious peace. Then, with a slow breath, it lowered its head to the floor beside the girl. Dr. Marlowe pressed her hand to the observation window. "He's showing trust," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Dragons never close their eyes near another living being. Never." Captain Gideon Halberg stood beside her, shoulders tense, his voice rough with awe. "He has chosen her. Not us, not science, not force. Her." The security team waited in silence, torn between duty and disbelief. Lieutenant Oren whispered, "We should end this. Bring her out before anything changes." But Dr. Marlowe shook her head firmly. "If we pull her out now, we may break the only connection he has chosen in years. Look at them. They are building something we don't understand." Inside the enclosure, Lyra rose to her feet. Each movement was deliberate, unhurried, as though she knew sudden motion might shatter the fragile trust. She walked to the feeding station and returned with another piece of meat. The dragon watched her every step, golden eyes unblinking, but did not stir. She placed the food on the sand and returned to her seated position. Once again, the dragon extended a claw, dragging the meat close. It ate slowly, carefully, then blinked at her in acknowledgement. The process repeated until the tray was nearly empty. With every offering, the weight of silence shifted. The room no longer felt heavy with despair, but alive with possibility. Finally, when the last piece was gone, Lyra did not move to fetch more. She simply sat quietly, her small hands resting in her lap. She spoke in that same gentle rhythm, as though continuing a conversation only the dragon could understand. Then, in a moment that froze every watcher, the dragon let out a long, rumbling exhale, and lowered its body fully to the ground. Its head rested near the child, eyes closing completely. For a dragon, this was not submission, but something far greater. It was rest. It was trust. Gideon's voice was barely a whisper. He's sleeping, with her still inside. Dr. Marla wiped her eyes, her professional mask breaking. This is no longer just survival. This is healing. The teachers and caretakers arrived soon after, their faces pale with fear when they saw Lyra inside the cage. Miss Helder, the teacher responsible for the group, pressed both hands to her mouth. "That's my student," she whispered. "She hardly speaks at school. How can she do this?" Gideon placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. Sometimes the quietest voices reach the deepest wounds. For long minutes, the sanctuary remained in hushed stillness. The dragon slept, its scarred body at peace, for the first time since captivity. The child stayed beside it, watching over it like a guardian who needed no weapons. Eventually, Lieutenant Oren spoke again. "We cannot leave her there. It is still a dragon, still dangerous." "Yes," Dr. Marlowe agreed. "But look, he has chosen to trust her, perhaps for the first time. He feels safe." When the containment field was finally lowered, it was not to drag Lyra out in panic, but to let her rise slowly on her own. She stood, brushed the sand from her hands, and walked back through the shimmering barrier as calmly as she had entered. The dragon did not stir. Its chest rose and fell in deep, steady rhythm, a rhythm that matched the memory of her voice. In the days that followed, the miracle became clear. Lyra returned, always quiet, always calm. Each visit brought more life to the dragon's eyes. Scars remained, but the emptiness faded. He ate willingly now, not because of the food, but because of the bond. The Aurora Menagerie, once a hollow place of forgotten echoes, found new purpose. The story spread across colonies and star systems, carried in whispers and reports alike. The tale of a dragon who had lost hope and a child whose stillness brought it back. Scientists recorded data, charts filled with new readings. But none could explain the bond in full. Gideon said it best one evening as he watched Lyra sitting by the dragon's side. The universe doesn't always ask for more knowledge. Sometimes it only asks for kindness. And so, within a sanctuary at the edge of a dim red star, trust bloomed where fear had lived. A dragon scarred by cruelty found peace. A child burdened with silence found her voice without words. Together, they reminded all who witnessed it that even in the darkest corners of the galaxy, life can choose to begin again.